So chapter 2. How Pilon was lured by greed of position to forsake Danny's hospitality. The lawyer left them at the gate of the second house and climbed into his Ford and stuttered down the hill into Monterey. Danny and Pilon stood in front of the paintless picket fence and looked with admiration at the property. A low house streaked with old whitewash, uncurtained windows blank and blind. But a great pink rose of Castile was on the porch, and grandfather geraniums grew among the weeds in the front yard. This is the best of the two, said Pilon. It is bigger than the other. Danny held a new skeleton key in his hand. He tiptoed over the rickety porch and unlocked the front door. The main room was just as it had been when the viejo had lived there. The red rose calendar for 1906, the silk banner on the wall with fighting Bob Evans looking between the superstructures of a battleship, the bunch of red paper roses tacked up, the strings of dusty red peppers and garlic, the airtight stove, the battered rocking chairs. Pilon looked in the door. 3 rooms, he said breathlessly, and a bed and a stove. We will be happy here, Danny. Danny moved cautiously into the house. He had bitter memories of the viejo. Pilon darted ahead of him and into the kitchen. A sink with a faucet, he cried. He turned the handle. No water, Danny. You must have the company turn on the water. They stood and smiled at each other. Pilon noticed that the worry of property was settling on Danny's face. No more in life would that face be free of care. No more would Danny break windows now that he had windows of his own to break. Pilon had been right. He had been raised among his fellows. His shoulders had straightened to withstand the complexity of life. But one cry of pain escaped him before he left for all time his old and simple existence. Pilon, he said sadly, I wish you owned it and I could come to live with you. While Danny went to Monterey to have the water turned on, Pilon wandered into the weed-tangled backyard. Fruit trees were there, bony and black with age and gnarled and broken from neglect. A few tent-like chicken coops lay among the weeds. A pile of rusty barrel hoops, a heap of ashes, and a sodden mattress. Pilon looked over the fence into Miss Morales' chicken yard, and after a moment of consideration he opened a few small holes in the fence for the hens. They would like to make nests in the tall weeds, he thought kindly. He considered how he could make a figure-4 trap in case the roosters came in too and bothered the hens and kept them from the nests. We will live happily, he thought again. So you just have to train dogs not to kill chickens and keep dogs around to keep the coyotes away. Danny came back indignant from Monterey. That company wants a deposit, he said. Deposit? Yes, they want $3 before they will turn on the water. $3, Pilon said severely. It's 3 gallons of wine, and when that is gone, we will borrow a bucket of water from Miss Morales next door. He was fucking with Miss Morales' chickens? $3, Pilon said severely. It's 3 gallons of wine, and when that is gone, we will borrow a bucket of water from Miss Morales next door. But we haven't $3 for wine. I know, Pilon said. Maybe we can borrow a little wine from Miss Morales. The afternoon passed. Tomorrow we will settle down, Danny announced. Tomorrow we will clean and scrub, and you, Pilon, will cut the weeds and throw the trash in the gulch. I like that. The weeds, Pilon cried in horror. Not those weeds, he explained his theory of Miss Morales' chickens. Danny agreed immediately. My friend, he said, I am glad you have come to live with me. Now, while I collect a little wood, you must get something for dinner. Pilon, remembering his brandy, thought this unfair. I'm getting in debt to him, he thought bitterly. My freedom will be cut off soon. I shall be a slave because of this Jew's house. But he did go out to look for some dinner. 2 blocks away near the edge of the pine wood, he came upon a half-grown Plymouth Rock rooster scratching in the road. He had come to that adolescent age when its voice cracked, when its legs and neck and breast were naked, perhaps because he had been thinking of Miss Morales' hens in a charitable vein. This little rooster engaged Pilon's sympathy. He walked slowly on toward the dark pine woods, and the chicken ran ahead of him. Pilon mused, poor little bare fowl, how cold it must be for you in the early morning, when the dew falls and the air grows cold with the dawn. The good God is not always so good to little beasts. And he thought, here you play in the street, little chicken, someday an automobile will run over you, and if it kills you, that will be the best that can happen. It may only break your leg or your wing, then all your life you will drag along in misery. Life is too hard for you, little bird. He moved slowly and cautiously. Now and then the chicken tried to double back, but always there was Pilon in the place it chose not to go. At last it disappeared into the pine forest, and Pilon sauntered after it. To the glory of his soul be it said that no cry of pain came from that thicket. That chicken which Pilon had prophesied might live painfully, died peacefully, or at least quietly, and this is no little tribute to Pilon's technique. 10 minutes later he emerged from the woods and walked back toward Danny's house. The little rooster, picked and dismembered, was distributed in his pockets. If there was one rule of conduct more strong than any other to Pilon, it was this: never under any circumstances bring feathers, head or feet home, for without these a chicken cannot be identified. In the evening they had a fire of cones in the airtight stove. The flames growled in the chimney. Danny and Pilon, well fed, warm, and happy, sat in the rocking chairs and gently teetered back and forth. At dinner they had used a piece of candle, but now only the light from the stove cracks dispelled the darkness of the room. To make it perfect, rain began to patter on the roof, only a little leaked through, and that in places where no one wanted to sit anyway. It is good, this, Pilon said. Think of the nights when we slept in the cold. This is the way to live. It is good, this, Pilon said. Think of the nights we slept in the cold. This is the way to live. Yes, and it is strange, Danny said. 4 years I had no house. Now I have 2. I cannot sleep in 2 houses. Pilon hated waste. This very thing has been bothering me. Why don't you rent the other house, he suggested. Danny's feet crashed on the floor. Pilon, he cried. Why didn't I think of it? The idea grew more familiar. But who will rent it, Pilon? I will rent it, said Pilon. I will pay $10 a month in rent. 15, Danny insisted. It's a good house. It is worth 15. Pilon agreed, grumbling, but he would have agreed too much more. He would have agreed to much more, for he saw the elevation that came to a man who lived in his own house, and Pilon longed to feel that elevation. It is agreed then, Danny concluded. You will rent my house. Oh, I will be a good landlord, Pilon. I will not bother you. Pilon, except for his year in the army, had never possessed $15 in his life, but he thought it would be a month before the rent was due, and who could tell what might happen in a month. They teetered contentedly by the fire. After a while, Danny went out for a few moments and returned with some apples. The rain would have spoiled them anyway, he apologized. Pilon, not to be outdone, got up and lighted the candle. He went into the bedroom and in a moment returned with a washbowl, pitcher, 2 red glass vases, and a bouquet of ostrich plumes. It is not good to have so many breakable things around, he said. When they are broken, you become sad. It is much better never to have them, never to have had them. It is much better never to have had them. He picked the paper roses from the wall. A compliment for Signora Torelli, he explained as he went out the door. Shortly afterward he returned, wet through from the rain, but triumphant in manner, for he had a gallon jug of red wine in his hand. They argued bitterly later, but neither cared who won, for they were tired with the excitements of the day. The wine made them drowsy, and they went to sleep on the floor. The fire died down, the stove creaked as it cooled. The candle tipped over and expired in its own grease, with little blue protesting flares. The house was dark and quiet and peaceful. They argued bitterly later, but neither cared who won, for they were tired with the excitements of the day. The wine made them drowsy, and they went to sleep on the floor. The fire died down, the stove creaked as it cooled. The candle tipped over and expired in its own grease, with little blue protesting flares. The house was dark and quiet and peaceful. I don't know. It seems like even if they sold the house for money, they would. They're good. They seem like good guys, so like they'll figure it out. People probably just they'll figure it out. People need somewhere to live. They'll find food. You just don't sell the house, no matter what. Don't fucking sell the house ever.